Well, I would say we should probably begin speaking about the state and where we think they're at.
Can we do it politely? It's obviously the session that ends Wednesday. It is extremely unlikely, and they've stated so, that we'll have a budget within their time frame. Right now, they're not even talking about setting a special session, although leadership is still talking about June 30th as a target. I've got October 5th as my expectation, but it's a mess. And if you bear with me 1 minute, most years we spend a lot of time talking about spending. Tonight you're going to talk about a 90-day spending, and option A and B, get into that. But this budget process is really much more about revenue. And there are at least 5 budget scenarios that are bouncing around, particularly the big ticket item for us is our education cost sharing, our aid to education. We get about $9.8 million right now. Some of the budgets that are going around would be a $5 million reduction. To put that in perspective, that's about 6 mills, or about a 24% tax increase. So while it's nice to talk about what ifs, that is a strong what if, because our enrollment is down by 25%, and that education aid has been frozen, not recognizing a lot of that enrollment reduction. Additionally, our wealth as a community has increased.
Over about 10 years.
Yes, over 10
so
years.
Understand.
Our wealth as a community has increased. So the wealth factor is built into that formula. Our median family income is about 123% of state average. So those 2 factors, that while we're not a wealthy community, they look at these factors, and what that really says is that we have working families that have 2 incomes. And we don't have extreme poverty, and we don't have extreme wealth. So we have a big cluster in the middle. But that doesn't help us on the way the formula works.
And they're adjusting the formulas.
So, yes, and that's where the different scenarios are coming in. They're playing with factors in those formulas. So under several of those, including the governor's budget, we would lose a dramatic amount of, we're in the top 16 in terms of loss of revenue in the state. So the reality is, unless people think that we're going to get a 22% increase in taxes when we go to a referendum, there's grave issues coming. And it's not just this year, because some of them, they're going to phase it in over the next 5 or 6 years under some of the scenarios. Some will do okay, but the reality is that education cost sharing, we are going to get less, and it's just a matter of how fast that pace is going to come. Additionally, they've cut, a couple years ago they raised the sales tax slightly, and that money was supposed to come to towns. That, it's called MRSA money, flesh-eating bacteria money. They are planning to take all that money from towns, so that's $358,000. I learned today that they're taking away the senior tax credit. It's buried deep and wasn't in any information, so we lose $48,000 there. The casino money, we're going to build casinos, we're going to give money to towns to fund education. Well, we'll lose all of that money, $48,000. The payment in lieu of tax money for land that the state owns in our town, we'll lose all of that money. So you start adding up all this money that we've relied on for decades and decades.
But ECS and transportation are the 2 big ones.
And the transportation money was cut last year, so it was cut after our budget, so we have to reflect that in this year's budget. So the income side, again, is the problem. And then add in other wild cards of, are we going to have to pay for teachers' retirement, which could be, anywhere from $400,000 to $1.2 million and rising. And nobody knows for certain about that. Add in one more factor of uncertainty, that the existing law on the state books, that they're saying they're going to change, but they haven't, and the session expires Wednesday, is that there'll be a tax cap on motor vehicles of 32 mils. Doesn't affect us right now at 31.2 mils, but if we start adding 5 mils,
6 mils.
or 6 mils, the cars stop at 32, which means personal property tax and houses have to make up the difference. So the reality is,
So the percentage of increase on houses would go up higher, that's what you're saying?
yes, the reality is that unless people can really look in the mirror and say that they believe this community will support that type of level of taxation, then we're talking about the potential that the 90-day budget or the budget that council first proposed is going to look like a very, very generous budget compared to what the final budget may be. And that's not just us. It's going to be lots of towns. You can call it a shift if you want versus a tax increase, but we're not going to be getting the money from the state. And I'm glad to see a lot of citizens here. Have you made your phone calls to your leadership? Because they're the ones making the decision of what's impacting us right now. So at some point, they'll stop pointing fingers at each other. They'll recognize that they do have to raise some state revenue, most likely. Sales tax will go to 6.99%, which will just be a pain to calculate, versus 7%. But I don't think it's going to go over 7%, because then we would not be competitive with our neighbors. I don't see the income tax changes coming. They'll never get votes for that. That doesn't raise that much money. So the state is billions in the hole for each of the next 2 years. If they don't fund the teacher, if they don't make us fund the teacher's retirement, that means more money that they've got to come up with somewhere else.